welcome to BizPulse. My name is Cindy Mabi. Good evening to you. Good news, consumers may find themselves smiling all the way to the supermarket. This is all thanks to the recent food statistics released by Stats SA, which shows a noticeable drop in food prices. According to Stats SA's latest Consumer Price Index, or CPI, statistical release, consumers this year found themselves spending more money on necessities such as education, medical services, insurance, water, electricity, and fresh produce. However, the recent data shows that there's a considerable price drop in some of these items, including food prices. We take a look at some of the food price decreases. And vegetable prices have fallen by 3.6% over the last 2 months. The price of oils and fats have gone down by 3.9%. Bread and cereals prices have dropped by 4%. Prices of fruit have gone down by 8.4%. And the economic impact of this is that the drop in food prices may also see a better performing economy. Key areas of interest are being a stronger rand, cut in interest rates, as well as an increase in sales and exports. And joining us in studio, Krista Yobe, agricultural economist. Thanks so much for your time. We also have Tamuka Chirumambwa, an economist on the phone line. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. Good news for a change, because we know that consumers have been really under pressure when it comes to disposable income and having to pay for the bare necessities.
Yes, good evening, Cindy. Yeah, as we earlier said in the year, that we expect that food prices will drop to the latter part of the year, and that is exactly what we're currently seeing. Good news is that the consumer will have more money to spend on other food stuff, and it's not all the food stuff that's going to drop. On the red meat side, we probably will see a sideways to increased movement, but the rest of the system will see a huge decrease, and I think we can expect for the rest of the year that this trend will continue.
Yeah. Tamuka, just in your view as well, I mean, I think what consumers would want to see is more change in their pocket, considering the economic climate and the recession. In your view, how soon are we likely to see the impact of these food prices?
I think to say too soon might not be that too soon, but at least what is important at the moment is that we are actually having these positive trends beginning to creep in, particularly after the favorable weather season, which went through, which created, better in terms of the harvest experience in South Africa as well within the Southern Africa region. But I think the more better it becomes, or the more the food prices decrease, consumers would be quite very happy about this thing.
All right, what are the other attributes? Because we know earlier on there had been a very serious or severe case of drought in certain parts, impacting, of course, on the harvest. In your view, what else contributed to the price decreases, rather?
I think generally, to me, the major contributory factor has been the issue of favorable weather, and as well, I think also part of the planning. When you look at, the policy interventions made by governments within the region, trying to ensure that they do have food security. So what that has done, it has created an adequate supply. It has kind of depressed even the spiraling of food-related price increases. Because even if you look even things around like meat, because most of it is stock-fed, it would mean that even the grain would be available to make sure that the prices of such key commodities or the inputs which goes through into some of this food system, they actually stabilize prices or lead to a decrease. So I think mainly it has been the issue of the favorable weather, and as well as the policy interventions made by governments within the region. That is South Africa, and as well as like you look at Zambia, Malawi, and Zimbabwe to some extent, trying to make sure that productivity goes up.
Tamuka, stay on the line. We have Mr. Yobed in studio, agricultural economist. Is this a sustainable trend that we're seeing, or is it temporary?
I think for the medium term, we'll see that food prices will move sideways, especially on the back of what's currently happening with the good rains that we have in our grain triangle. The farmers, especially from the eastern side, Mpumalanga side, already start plant. We're sitting with a bumper crop. The crop is not getting out of the country due to prices that seem to be a little bit too high, specifically on the maize prices. But if those prices are going to drop, then we need to get a lot of maize out of the country. But I do not see for the medium to short term that we'll see rises again very quickly and fast.
All right, let's get a view from Leon Lowe, Executive Director of Free Market Foundation. Leon, thanks so much for your time. Good news for consumers. Would you say it's also good news for retailers?
For the economy generally, and one of your guests did touch on this, but it's worth getting of the Reserve Bank.
Leon, just move around a little bit. Your line is scratchy.
Oh, it's unfortunately I'm driving, so if we don't get a good connection, there's not much I can do about it. I'm in a remote part. Can you hear me now?
Much better. And we hope you have a hands-free kit. But go ahead.
Yes, I'm a passenger, so it's okay.
All right.
But yes, the money supply, or the base money supply, cash in circulation, has been falling. The Reserve Bank has actually been behaving in a very responsible way and slowing down the growth in the money supply. That's an important factor, not just for food prices, but for all prices and for the economy generally, giving us a prospect of price stability. And it should, seeing that the Reserve Bank is probably committed to an enduring policy, be a lasting state of affairs. Good news for consumers, but more importantly, good news for everybody, for retailers, for the economy, and moving away from inflation. One aspect worth noting is that if there isn't food price inflation, there probably also won't be salary or income inflation. In other words, it doesn't necessarily mean that the ratio between what people have as income, their disposable income, and what they spend on food isn't necessarily going to improve, but it is good to have stable prices in the country, and we should be very pleased about that.
Yeah, but to use the adage that a man doesn't live on bread alone, of course there are other obligations that we have as the working class, that of having to pay for amenities and transport. So I'm not sure if this will necessarily curb the industrial action. But let's go back to consumer confidence, especially now having more buying power, and what that means to the economy.
Well, it does, and remember, the workers are also, of course, consumers. That's why people work, in order to be consumers. So the end goal of all employment, of all wage negotiations, is actually consumption, is to be a consumer. And so you're quite right. The fact that food alone is not everything, but what we're likely to see is a stable economy. And that is an economy in which people, especially in business and government, for example, the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, can make long-term planning. And that is very important. So it is generally what one wants to see. But I need to make this observation, that there are always pressures on government to increase or inflate the money supply, which means to reduce the value of money, in the belief that that stimulates the economy. That's called so-called stimulation. It's a myth. It's an economic myth. And I have to say that the government seems to be behaving in a particularly responsible way, and we should be very pleased about that.
Would you say it's an indication of a recovering economy, or is it too soon to call?
Yes. Well, we're not likely to achieve significant growth rates. And the reason for that is our general overall economic policy is far too interventionistic to achieve the rates that high-growth countries achieve, which always and everywhere is by reducing the role and functions of government. So we're not seeing that. So we're not likely to see much economic growth or recovery. What we are likely to see is stability. That is good, and we're likely to see some growth, maybe 1 or 2% instead of effectively at the moment 0. So yes, things are going to improve, but we mustn't be Pollyannas. This is not Santa Claus economics that's coming our way. we're still in a tighten your belt phase. I always call it Santa Claus economics and TYB, tighten your belt. So we're not yet in a position where we can start rejoicing job creation, economic growth, prosperity, but we can at least say we've probably bottomed out and things probably aren't going to get worse. They will start getting better at a slow rate. That is probably what our outlook is.
All right, Leon Lowe, thank you so much. Safe travels to you. He's with the Free Market Foundation. Joseph Busher is a market analyst. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Again, looking at what the knock-on effects will be of the food price decreases, but primarily in how it will increase not only in terms of the currency stability, job creation. I think is a very critical one. We can't really stretch it to that far. Would you say it's more about the surplus of food that we've seen as opposed to any other market conditions?
I agree with you 100%. So we need to understand that I think South Africa, or like in totality, the staple food is starch, whether it's maize, white maize, and whether it's rice. And we have had a record from a production perspective. I think from South Africa perspective, since 1981, this could be one of the biggest harvests ever. So if you look into that and also say all the agricultural produce, they also feed into our animals, the cattle and so on, which makes all the feed stock cheaper for animals. So in overall, all the food or what we consume as people becomes cheaper, both the meat and certainly the maize and so on. But I think the most important thing to note here is that also the rand has been fairly stable, between about 12.50 and 14, and hence we've seen the petrol price being stable. But as a founding bite, you saw that the Reserve Bank decided not to reduce interest rates, which means then what they wanted to do, or the message is that we need to be cautious as consumers so that we do not basically go into overspending, because we're still losing jobs, but not at the rate where it started at the beginning of the year, because your mining companies now have reduced the rhetoric of cutting jobs and so on. So for me, I think the consumers, certainly there's something to celebrate, but your retailers might not celebrate as much, because they have to keep obviously their prices lower, purely because we don't believe that workers are going to get a better salary increase, because your inflation now is sitting at about 5.1, 5.3.
All right, Mr. Yobe, I mean, the sustainability of it all, the kind of interventions that government, industry and business can do to ensure food security, number one, and also affordable prices.
I think there's two very important issues that we need to understand. First of all, the agricultural sector contributes around about 33% growth the last quarter. And with the mining sector's growth, it takes South Africa out of a technical recession. We're supposed to get into a physical recession. We're actually out of that. We start showing positive growth. Thank you for the agricultural sector. Thank you for the mining sector. When we start looking at the consumer side, yes, the consumers can breathe a little bit. And I think it's not Christmas yet, as Mr. Leon said. But we need to understand that there's more money in the consumer's pocket. So, and more money to spend on other commodities, other stuff. I'm not sure what else. And we need to understand, as long as we support our agricultural sector in a viable way, then we will see that the growth will continue over the long term. And we also need to understand the agricultural sector is very small in terms of the GDP, but it contributes significantly to the secondary side of the economy, around about 15 to 20%.
Yeah, and Mr. Busher, I mean, just international benchmark, we hear a lot that our agricultural sector is not subsidized as well as more developed nations are, and perhaps that is a policy intervention that is required. What is your view?
No, I agree with you. Remember, the developed markets basically because of technology, so they can subsidize and possibly they can produce far much cheaper than we do here in SM. So I think government needs to start possibly intervening more there and help farmers, in particular your emerging farmers, because if they can broaden the number of people participating in farming and making sure that they've got the right equipment, the right technology, and the right inputs, I think it would be better for South Africa overall. And, there have obviously been some few challenges in terms of broadening that and also access to finance. I'm quite happy that I think lending book in terms of agriculture increased quite well over the last 2 years. And I hope with the government support and a little bit of subsidies, in particular to new emerging farmers, could help sustainability of the farming community, and certainly I think keeping the food prices a little bit lower. We believe that next year there will be sufficient rains like we had last year around the regions. You saw obviously the little rains we had. So if you were to be driving towards Witbank, I was going to Swaziland, there's a whole lot of planting and tilling of the land that is going on, which is really quite a positive sign that by now, end of September, most of those people have started or finished already preparing the land.
Mr. Chirimamboa is back with us. Tamuka, thanks so much. In terms of inter-African trade, I mean, do you think that the latest statistics on consumer food prices will encourage a self-reliance and more and less imports of foods products in the continent?
Pardon? I beg your pardon?
No, I'm saying in inter-Africa trade where there's less reliance on imports of food products, that these statistics show, there's an opportunity to do greater trade amongst the countries.
Yes, the opportunity exists, but I think at the end of the day, what will really matter is the policies undertaken in particular by the government as well as other African governments. So to what extent will they try and make agriculture sustainable and address the issue of production and make sure that there's less reliance on imports? And also not just necessarily that, but also in terms of making the production competitive and far much cheaper. Because in as much as we may produce, but if you don't address the issues of the issues of the final price of the product on the market in terms of the inputs that goes into the whole system, at the end of the day, the whole issue of sustainability will fall away.
Mr. Hubert, what I wanted to localize, we talk about beneficiation in the mining sector, but if you look at the monopoly in terms of the food supply, we're going to, Unilever, you go for Tiger Brands, Pioneer Foods, etc. And these are largely international brands that may be manufactured here. So at which point then will we be able to have our own food security based on our own technologies and production lines?
Well, first of all, I think that's the legacy from the apartheid regime, that we see a lot of concentration, and that is typically the unintended consequences that we inherit from those days. But with that, there's a lot of competition in the market, and these guys, if you're only looking at the retail side, we're sitting with 5 huge retailers in the country. They're in so competition with each other, they keep food prices low. And I've heard the previous speakers said about the intervention. I'm a little bit skeptic about that. I think we do not need so much intervention in our market. We need support. That is the thing. We need to look after our farmers. Black or white, I do not care. The thing is, the farmers is actually the basket, the bread basket of the country, and South Africa can make a lot of money out of the commercial side of it. And the free market system showed us just we're coming through a huge drought, but we still had food on our tables. And currently what's happening? Suddenly we see this huge decreases in the food prices. Yes, we're coming from high, but my belief is that we need support from government, we need protection where it's necessary, and then we need government and private partnership to open up markets for us. And to go out specifically and say this is South Africa, because South Africa is sitting with the best farmers in the world.
But then that level of protection, how do you define it in a world where we have bilateral agreements and treaties? And also, I suppose, if you look at the agreements in terms of the imports on American chicken, etc., how then do you protect the market when there's those strategic agreements around the world?
Well, it's typically, it's a trading issue. And when it's dumping, taking into the and dumping taking into account, then we must look after that and tell that specific countries, but you guys is busy dumping. You guys is really busy hurting our industries. Industries that give South Africa food security, that gives South Africa the affordability, the availability, and also the accessibility with the necessary nutritional value in the food system. So, and that is where government and private sector need to come out in the lobby side and say, but this is what will happen.
Mr. Busher, your view in just having more protection for local producers and farmers more specifically in the international trade agreements, whether there is elbow room to even negotiate ourselves out of that to encourage more reliance on local producers?
I think our local producers have been crying for quite a long time in terms of the flooding of cheap imports. Had chickens from Brazil and so on. Government needs to be able to put standards that are basically good for our producers. I think it's not only in agriculture. You saw with the Chinese steel imports that was hating ArcelorMittal steel and so on. So I think if government comes in and said this is not really being protectionist, but this is really to say this is the standards we require from a production perspective, then the pricing can remain competitive for obviously our local producers. So I believe certainly as a developing economy or country, we need to have those interventions, and government really needs to renegotiate some of these things. I mean, America has been renegotiating AGOA now and again within the region. So I don't believe that we can leave everything to free market. I think government needs to be able to consider national interest as well. And we've seen this with the new U.S. president.
Mr. Joseph Busher, thank you so much for your time. That's market analyst on the line. Tamuka, before we let you go, just is there political will in your view, just looking at the African presidents and states, their ability to produce and the agriculture being an anchor of those economies? Do you think it's being utilized efficiently?
I really don't think agriculture has been quite utilized efficiently as such. But I think, like I've earlier said, more depends on, in terms of our government, how they conceptualize our economies and also realize the importance of agriculture, particularly in stimulating production within the national economies and also other downstream industries. I think there's still a lot of work that really needs to be done. And just to give one a comment, one, like on the question which you asked earlier on, there is no way the state can leave agriculture alone. Agriculture is a key strategic sector in any economy, and agriculture on its own cannot exist and successfully thrive without some kind of form of subsidy or intervention from the state. And even if you go to America, even if you go to Europe, they still use the same policy. So, I mean, there's no need to reinvent the wheel or to reimagine the free market solving the agricultural question without the state. That is not true.
Yeah. Tamuka, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed for joining us on the phone line, and we'll wrap it up with Mr. Yobe. At which level are the discussions in terms of more support for the agricultural sector?
It is on high levels. Producer organizations coming out and form hands with government. There's a lot of efficiencies that need to be addressed. To give you a simple example, we have a tariff on wheat. The tariff was already triggered that it must come down last year, and it took around about 6 to 7 months at that stage before that the lower tariff was introduced, and that put a lot of pressure on the total stock levels because no importer want to import at a higher rate. So we need some more efficiencies, but that stuff is been addressed. And as we standing, Grain South Africa have his award function tonight, and I know there's ministers from the labour side, the agricultural side, DDGs. So there's a lot of working together. And but I think it can be much more better in the future.
Yeah, and are we insulated from the fourth revolution, as it were, with the robotics and all of that coming into play?
No, South Africa have we adapt the technology that's in the market very good. We look after our systems. Yes, obviously, if we're going back to the bird flu thing, that's a thing that's coming from Asia and Europe, and I believe that it will be contained in the future.
All right, Mr. Joubert, thank you so much for coming through. We know he's got very important things to do, and a lovely lady in red waiting for you. So thank you so much for your time. Mr. Joubert is an agricultural economist joining us, reflecting on the Statistics SA latest food prices numbers that indicate that consumers are in a good place and more affordability and disposable income in your pocket. We'll take a quick break. We'll see you shortly.